Warning, this podcast typically features spoilers and strong opinions. Proceed with caution. Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Grooms, One Plot, the podcast where two lifelong storytellers who are married talk about stories. I'm Pavi Prochko, audiobook narrator, author, etc.
And I'm Colin Funk, childhood development expert and teaching artist.
And this is Jimothy, our puppy.
Puppy.
And today we're going to be talking about episode...
Yeah, Mary and George.
Yeah, Mary and George,
5.
episode 5.
5, yeah.
Yes. Yes. Mary and George, episode 5. As part of our short series for the whole series of Mary and George. So, because these are the truncated ones, we go straight into our switch hit synopsis.
Exactly.
Yes, so the episode is called
The Golden City.
Mm-hmm.
So we start out, it opens as Sir Walter Raleigh gets approached by somebody in his team and essentially threatens him, is like, I'm going to tell them what you did.
Right.
And Raleigh's like, nah,
and kills him. Meanwhile, we've got then back in England, Mary's husband, Sir Thomas, is like pissed at everyone. And so he's like, bails. He's like, I'm going to shoot you if you get on my property.
While George is like, I'm not listening to you anymore. So this all happens during a portrait
Yeah,
session.
they're doing a portrait. And she's like, can you take a step back? And he's like, no, I'm good here. The queen is sick.
Yes. And we also talk to the Prince Charles, and he's like really struggles answering a simple question from the king.
Yeah. So we're finally seeing some bits of what I was hoping for. We're seeing a little bit of Prince Charles. So basically we've got like Mary starts making moves then, right? So she's like inviting people because she's trying to get George married off. So it's like an enemy of hers, but of her late husband's friend.
But then she pushes George to join some political meeting.
Oh, yeah.
And this political meeting with Bacon and this new person who goes by Diego, who is
it's like the Spanish envoy.
Yes.
In London.
Who is talking to the king is like, there's a problem. Sir Walter Raleigh attacked Spanish people in
the New World, somewhere,
Guiana. And you were supposed to keep him in a tower, so there's a problem. You should probably kill Sir Walter Raleigh.
Right.
And they're like, okay, well, we'll have like a fair hearing, not like a real trial, but we'll do that.
Yeah.
But George kind of like busts in on this.
Yeah,
and
he like horns in on
hey, I'm here too. And King James is like, what
are you doing here? And he's like, well, fine. I did say I would teach you.
Right. And so he like says, okay, come with me to this trial. They do this hearing with Sir Walter Raleigh. Sir Walter Raleigh essentially charms George. And George is like, you are absolutely going to go back and look for El Dorado in the New World. Yeah. Absolutely. And the king's like, what the F did you just do?
About? Yeah.
Like, he is clearly, we do not want a war with Spain.
Right.
Like, you don't speak for me. You don't get to just like say that.
And meanwhile, we also have Francis, who married John.
Yes.
And is like cheating on John.
The older brother, George's older brother, who's not really all there.
Yeah.
But she's like, look, I'm trying for an heir with him. It's not working. So I'm going to do what I want. I was kind of like screwed in this situation. So I'm going to do what I want. If you want to like kill me or move me to some other place, that's fine. Right. But I'm gonna do what I want to do until then.
And turns out she's pregnant.
She's pregnant.
And so, what's her name? The
Brooks.
Irish girl, Miss Brooks, gives her some concoction to induce
an abortion.
Horrible. Really horrible.
Not very painful, very horrible.
It looks like not pleasant. And then Charles also confronts George. So we see like kind of two sides of Charles. We see like Charles like in front of everyone who's really nervous. And then like later he's like
Charles is like
maybe a little drunk. I don't know, but
maybe who knows?
He confronts George one-on-one, and he's basically like, "I am the prince, and you are better look out for me."
Also, the king's love doesn't last forever.
Yeah, right. So
meanwhile, there's a plan for George to get married.
Yes.
The daughter of Rutledge, essentially, with the help of George's sister, for the first time, has any sort of backbone throughout the whole series. Finally.
Yeah.
And is like, we're going to make him marry what's-her-face.
Right.
So they trap him at home at, the
estate.
The
like
estate.
Their estate, yeah.
And with this daughter of Rutledge, and she essentially convinces him to marry her.
I can be your really good ally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they like spend the night together, basically forcing Rutledge's hand.
Because her dad does not want them to get married, but if they spend the night together, then it's a scandal, and then they have to get married.
Right.
Yada, yada, yada.
And then all the while, we've got Bacon is still like doing his machinations opposite Mary, and is basically like, Mary, I know that you murdered someone. So we've got like Mary trying to move all these pieces.
Now.
We've got Bacon trying to move these pieces because Bacon doesn't like Raleigh, and Mary's trying to be nice with the Queen, and the Queen loves Raleigh.
But now Bacon's getting really in with George,
right?
And Bacon and Diego are kind of working together,
right?
And convince George that Raleigh is not great,
right?
They take him to some rally where Raleigh is like talking some shit about the throne, and convince him that Raleigh's like not the great hero that he believes that, the Queen thinks so, that all the,
he's like a lot of people, he was obviously charmed in that meeting. Yeah.
And a lot of people in England at the time were very in support of Raleigh.
Right.
So that makes it difficult.
Yeah.
But like watching him talk, it's like clear that he's like not quite all there.
Yeah.
And not quite the hero that everyone thinks he is.
Right.
So he goes back to the king and is like, King, what do you believe is right?
Yeah. Like George does. George goes
back to the king.
Like, what do you want to do? And of course, the king is like, well, he tried to usurp my throne, so I'm gonna chop his head off.
So he's condemned to death.
Yep.
The queen is pissed because the queen likes Raleigh.
Yeah.
And the queen thinks Mary has gotten George to convince the king to keep Raleigh, and that does not happen. But the queen's a little pissed.
And Mary's a little pissed. And then there's this kind of, the episode ends with like Mary being like, if he doesn't bow, it's war.
Right.
So it's like,
we're starting this it seems like this is the start of the like antagonism between George and Mary.
Right. Yeah. So we have this episode. It's like full of, story-wise, it's full of like all of the forces of antagonism are kind of like rearing their heads.
Sure.
We've got all of these, we were in the fun and games section of our story for a while, where it's like things are kind of working out. There are some challenges, but it's mostly going well. We're kind of learning our way through this new world. And now we're seeing kind of all of the, even though there's not necessarily like one particular villain, we've got all the people that kind of represent the challenges to Mary and George that are poking their heads up. We've got Bacon showing up. We've got the Spanish show up. We've got Raleigh showing up. And so we're really kind of setting up kind of the difficulties that our heroes weren't quite ready for.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they've been flying by the seat of their pants the whole time.
Right.
So this episode specifically, what do you think?
I really like when it gets political like that. I think it's really interesting. Kind of like pays off a lot of the questions that we've had earlier about like, okay, but
they're pretty quick to pay off.
Happening. They are pretty good at paying off things. It's just when sometimes
they're very. I mean, like they are very. It feels like they're very. They have a good use of their time.
Yeah,
they are. What's the word? Economic.
They're economical.
Economic is what them is.
They're
the
economical about their storytelling.
Their storytelling.
Sure. Yeah.
So they're only telling us the stuff that is important to the story.
Yeah, I don't know if we've mentioned this in the previous episodes, but it became very clear to me in this one that the beginnings of the episode are really good at setting up what we're specifically going to need to know this episode. And some of it becomes relevant later, of course, but instead of setting up all of these things, it's like, well, that's going to pay off 3 episodes from now. It's like, no. I'm going to show you at the beginning of the episode, here's where we are, here's all the, the dominoes getting set up, and when we knock them over, we're going to see them all fall. We're going to actually see something happen.
Right, there are full arcs within each episode, for sure.
Which is great. And then they also are relevant later.
You always want in every series.
Yes.
Like, of course, we want there to be kind of an overarching story, but each episode is going to be, it won't be successful unless there is a full story arc in each episode.
Yes.
And especially when something is kind of, is historical fiction. Mm-hmm. We're basing it on real life events. Sometimes it feels like we have to get through XYZ until we get to the interesting part.
Yeah.
And honestly, like, I don't think they're falling into that trap. Mm-mm. We're not spending extra time in these like time periods or things that are happening that aren't telling a story.
Right. Well, and I think even more aren't telling the current story we're watching, because I think there's a lot of there are a lot of shows that have episodes where the episode itself has an arc. Something like, I don't know, The Witcher comes to mind specifically, but even Game of Thrones will have like these big arcs, but we watch like small scenes that happen that don't get paid off that episode. Mm-hmm. They're like put in to set something up later. Because we need to, because then that's, of course, is true. Yes, I need to know that, but it's almost like you put it in too early because we're not actually going to see anything about it today. And this one, it's like, there are so many things that are obviously happening at the same time. Diego has been in London the whole time.
We didn't have to know Diego until this moment.
Right.
It's very possible that George has even met Diego or seen Diego or known of Diego. Right. Of course, Diego knows about him.
Of course, yeah.
So, but like, it makes sense that we're finally meeting him when he's actually part of the story.
Because I can imagine other stories where it's like, oh, well, you meet him in the first chapter because he's like around. He's like in the court.
Right.
But you don't need to know him unless he's important. And because he has no role in anything that happens, as far as what we're concerned with the story,
right,
we don't need to see him.
Exactly.
I think that's excellent. As you say, economical. I think
it's very economical. Which, it is a... I think that is very important, especially with these historical fiction pieces.
Yeah.
Because if you are trying to like cram, you have to cut. I mean, like, there is just so much that happens all the time. Politically, what's happening, it's like there's too much to deal with all at once.
Right.
You have to find your story and just talk about what's happening right now, what's important. Mm-hmm. And if you bring something up too soon, it's just not going to hit.
Yeah.
It's not going to land. It's going to be confusing.
People will forget about it. Yeah. I think like Witcher was like the worst culprit at this. I know a lot of people loved it, and you didn't finish all of it because we watched the first episode and we hated it.
I really didn't like it.
I did watch the rest of that season and the second season. I started the third because I'm like in it now. But that first season was so upsetting because of that. There's like the time frames that we're like watching kind of two different timelines. And there is, of course, like an overarching story for each one, but it's so piecemeal, especially the princess's story, where we're watching kind of like these small little vignettes that we don't actually get what is happening until the end. And then I'm like, oh, that's what was happening? I didn't understand. So they were really like trying to drop the story in too much, too early.
Sure. I mean, I didn't watch any of it, so
just
nothing past the first episode. Yeah, because I was really like,
well, and it was confusing. Even
I have
first
no
episode
idea
was
what's
confusing.
happening.
Yeah,
and I don't care.
It's like it was weird.
I didn't like it.
No. So one thing I will note about this episode is there were like fewer like badass moments that we've had. We've had more.
I mean, I do feel like this is an episode where we're starting to see weaknesses.
Yeah.
We're starting to see cracks, especially within the relationship. Like, I don't feel like before this episode that the relationship between Mary and George was anything but
simpatico.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, they were working together, and like they started this episode, and Mary gives him some directive during that portrait session, and he's like, "No, I'm good," and you're like,
"Oh,
okay, there's a shift."
Yeah, it's like a very clear shift there,
and that's kind of a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't have to do very much with it. They allowed it.
They allowed it to be what it is, because everything until then has been her giving orders and him kind of taking it, like trusting in her advice. And now he's like, "No, I'm standing on my own 2 feet now," and it's really clear. And especially with Mary specifically, she loses her husband. Her son kind of denies her, and so we really see her being like, "Uh-oh, I'm kind of losing my threads."
We're seeing the vulnerabilities, especially with Mary.
Yes.
While George is feeling kind of confident and cocky with his role, it shows the vulnerabilities and the weaknesses for Mary.
Right.
And I find that very interesting.
Mm-hmm. I think it's really well done. And in this episode specifically, George has a lot of kind of, he stumbles, but he actually is kind of coming into his own power a little bit.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
He's rising, Mary's falling.
Right.
And we see kind of that opposite.
He is Mary's son. He is taking a lot of that with him.
Yeah. But as far as like, even like the acting, like the good, like, acting moments, it felt like this was a lot of payoffs were happening, or there were a lot of introductions and payoffs that were happening. So there were fewer like, Mary telling Lady Coke, it's like, the Lady Coke's like, "Well, over my dead body that you're going to marry your son's going to marry my daughter." It's like, well, as long as the conditions are clear, right? There weren't so many like kind of quippy things, and maybe that's also like a product of the fact that it's like, "Oh, I'm actually on shakier ground. I'm not feeling that."
Right, she's not in position.
She's not in a position to be strong.
Where she would, like, those are like the head-to-head moments are the times where she feels very strong.
Yeah.
And she's not like given those opportunities.
Or even the ones that she is given, she's with the queen and the queen's like, "You fucked it up." Or she's with Bacon and Bacon's like, "I know what you did." And so she's actually caught off guard a lot of this time.
Yes. We're starting to see the cracks in her strategy, I guess.
Yeah. And it makes us curious about what's coming up next.
Ooh.
I'm very happy about seeing a little bit of Prince Charles, because I think that's just kind of knowing a little bit about British monarch history.
Don't tell me.
Just like knowing who he is like later on.
Sure.
I think it's really interesting to see him, and I was curious how that was going to play out.
I don't know history, so let me enjoy.
I doubt they'll actually get to it in this
who knows
series, but
don't spoil.
I won't spoil anything, but just knowing that
I know this podcast spoils things, but not for the
history,
future.
even though it's like widely known, and you can Wikipedia it.
I could, but I don't.
But you won't.
I know this podcast spoils, but I am a huge.
I
don't love spoilers. No, I mean, it's just like I don't like to watch. I'd like to go in fresh.
Yeah,
when I'm watching.
Colin does not watch.
I don't watch previews. I don't watch trailers. I don't like it. I want to know as little as possible.
Yeah,
because then I'm experiencing the story.
Yeah,
in the most fresh, in the most like pure way possible.
Yeah. Well, you probably get a good example.
That anyone walking in
should be able to get the story without
know nothing.
Right. Without a preview. And
exactly.
And that's the best way to experience the storytelling. Like, how good is the story told? Do I have all the information I need without having some synopsis given to me?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Speaking of which, why don't we get into our superlatives?
Let's do it. Our Oscar-worthy moment. What
I
have
really
we got?
like what I don't remember her name. His like wife to be.
Oh yes, whatever her name is, Rutledge. I thought that was
I think the scene. I think her. It is very clear that she is like well suited for him, even from the first. I mean, from the first scene that she's in, like we meet her at the dinner at the beginning of the episode. But like they have the scene where she's like trapping him in the bedroom.
Yeah.
But her strategy to kind of like get on his side is so solid.
Yeah.
And her acting is so good.
It's good. Yeah.
That I just think that wins it for me in that episode. I'm like, absolutely. I totally buy that she would convince him to do that.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a good scene to see that conversation happen and how she ends up winning him over the course of this evening. And she just like plays directly into everything that he wants.
Yeah.
It becomes very clear that like not weirdly, but appropriately, she ends up playing the role of, what's his name from the earlier episodes? The ones that got, for witchcraft, they were executed.
They tried what's
his old lover?
Yeah.
And that like that pairing, whereas like it's
similar. It's like that power couple.
Yeah, power couple. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a really good match.
It's very clear that they like
and
they're alike
very
mind.
well.
Yes. Yes, she does. I think she's very good. Whoever that actress is.
Yeah. I love it. My Oscar moment is when Sir Walter Raleigh gets his head chopped off. It's horrible. It is like the worst execution by like, because usually you see and it's just like a one chop and it does, and it's like it actually is like a lot more difficult to like kill someone with an axe than they always show on like TV shows and movies. And they like did it like for real, and it's like awful. It takes like a few strokes, and I just thought it was done very well to be that gross and realistic. It's like really, really well done set and prop work.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like very disturbing.
It's awful. Oh my God, it's awful.
In a very, realistic way, without being like feeling like it's gratuitous. I don't think it was.
Well, it's also like it's from a distance. They kind of like blur it out too, because you're watching George kind of react to it, which is also a really clever way to do that, rather than just like, we're going to see this effect happen and see how gross we can be. It's like, we're going to have a really disturbing thing happen, but we're watching his reaction, which is appropriately disturbed, and it's in the distance. It's not dead center. I thought it was really an excellent moment.
Yeah, it was good. So unearned
moment.
Okay, so maybe controversial. I like this moment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not sure that there was any sort of like lead up to it. When George's sister has a moment where she's like, I would like to get married to this man. And Mary's like, George has to get married first and he doesn't want to. And she's like, the daughter's like, let's just make him. And Mary's like, okay, go for it. Not that it feels like it comes out of nowhere necessarily. There's no even hint that this daughter has any sort of agency or...
She's so mealy. Like it's just like
it's
very
like,
milquetoast the whole time. Even at the beginning with the portrait scene.
Yes, it feels like they are giving it's like so extreme of a switch for her. They like want it to be like ooh, look at her.
Oh, she's Mary's daughter too.
Which is like very interesting, but also there's no way she would just like pull that out of nowhere.
I know.
So it's just like, while I like that and it makes sense, and I don't think it's like necessarily bad storytelling, it does feel unearned in that it doesn't feel set up really at all.
Yeah. And I think I have to agree with that. I have to give it that moment too, mostly because I didn't realize that was Mary's daughter. I didn't realize that was the sister.
What? You crazy.
I had no idea who that was. I was like, that must be some like servant
like in that scene.
Scene.
Oh, because she's so
distant that I was like, wait, who is that? Do we know who that is?
She's so yeah.
So I just like didn't even register that it was her because it's like, one, I don't remember her, and two, she doesn't behave that way, so it can't possibly be the daughter, right?
That's so funny. Yes,
so
it did feel like such a big departure from what she has been.
Who is that? Okay, yeah. So I agree for a little bit of a different reason.
I think they did that specifically for shock value. But I wish that there was like some sort of hint at some point.
Yeah.
That, like, there's a reason.
Even, anyway, I mean, they had an opportunity in the portrait scene.
Many moments. I mean, like, she's been in it the whole time.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's unearned.
Unearned moments. So finally, what is the thing we're most looking forward to? Why
don't you go first?
I noticed on Bacon's face, he has like a weird like lesion on his face, and nobody says anything about it. And I'm like, wait, is that the actor, or is that, what is that? That he's got this weird thing. I was like, that's like a weird oversight for makeup, or was it there the whole time? And I am interested to know if that's something. Like, why would it be there?
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
it's so weird.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I wonder.
Yeah,
that's interesting. I mean, I think I'll have to go with, like, I think that character, his like George's intended wife, I think is so interesting, and to see how that plays out, like how she is kind of like a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah,
I think that's what I'm most interested in.
Okay, cool. Well, we'll see what happens.
Cool.
Next time. Let's wrap it up, yeah?
Let's do it.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Two Grooms, One Plot. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts, on all the social medias. You can watch us on the YouTube and see our cute little puppy Jimothy down here.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you to the Chicago Podcast Studio. Thank you to Kaylee O, our social media maven. I'm Pavi Prachko. And remember, Diego was probably there the whole time.
Oh. And I am Colin Funk. And remember, you could be a national hero and still get your head chopped off. Crazy.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Two Grooms, One Plot, a Pavitas Productions project, hosted by Colin Funk and Pavi Prachko. This podcast was produced by Chicago Podcast Studio. Our opening cartoon was created by Gloriu, and our theme song was composed by me, Pavi Prachko. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite listening platform. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Two Grooms, One Plot for updates on new episodes and behind-the-scenes content. If you have any feedback, comments, concerns, or kudos, you can email us at twogrooms1plot@gmail.com. Please rate and review us wherever you can. It would help us out a bunch. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next time.